Hey guys, tonight we travel back to a muddy riverside outpost. A place so small you could toss a rock from one end to the other without even stretching your arm too far. It's the year 1808, and you're standing in a raw, half-forgotten town called St. Louis. Don't let the name fool you. There's no grand cathedral here, no polite avenues, just dirt paths, low wooden shacks, and the steady hum of insects under a swollen sky. The air smells of river muck, smoke from cast iron stoves, and something else you can't quite place, probably something rotting nearby. You're ankle deep in mud before you even realize it. And then you hear it. Not the river, not the shouting across the market, but a new sound, rhythmic and strange. Wood creaking, iron clanking, something being dragged up Market Street. You step out of the way just in time as two men, red-faced and breathless, struggle to carry a huge wooden machine that looks like it belongs in a different century. You blink. You squint. What are they doing with that? It's a printing press. And behind them walks a man with dark, sun-hardened skin, Irish eyes, and the kind of quiet intensity that makes people either trust you or punch you. That's Joseph Charles. He's about to print the first newspaper ever published this far west in America. Most of the town thinks he's out of his mind. You probably won't survive this journey without catching a few paper cuts from history. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're here, drop your location and your local time in the comments. I love knowing where and when people are listening from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You walk along the river. The Mississippi looms wide and slow beside you, swollen from spring rain and thick with brown current. A flatboat sways lazily against the dock, tied up next to barrels of salted pork and whiskey. You see chickens wandering the alleys, children poking sticks into puddles, and traders who have no idea what kind of town this will become. But Joseph Charles sees it. He sees more than the fur and the mud. He sees paper. He sees politics. He sees influence. This isn't just a muddy outpost to him. This is a city being born, and he wants to be the one to give it its voice. Charles was born in Westmeath, Ireland in 1772. He lived through the upheaval of the late 18th century and fled after being caught up in the Irish Rebellion of 1795. Historians still argue whether he was deeply involved revolutionary or just guilty by association. But what's certain is that he had to leave in a hurry. He made his way to France, and from there he crossed the Atlantic. He arrived in America with nothing but a trade and the desire to use it. In Philadelphia, he got work with Matthew Carey, one of the biggest publishers in the country at the time. Carey trusted him enough to let him handle sensitive jobs, and legend has it that Charles printed one of the first quarto Bibles in the United States. Whether or not that part's true, you can tell he was the kind of guy who wanted his name tied to something lasting. But East Coast cities were already crowded with printers and preachers and politicians, so Charles packed up his press and his family and headed west, first to Kentucky, then to Louisville, and eventually to a patch of land at the edge of the known American world. In July of 1808, he officially launched the Missouri Gazette in St. Louis, using a handmade press and paper hauled overland at great cost. The first issue, 4 pages long, typeset by hand, and printed so carefully you can still see the impressions on surviving copies. It may not look like much, but it was the beginning of something massive. You sit in the corner of his printing shop as he pulls the first page off the press. His hands are stained black with ink. His face glistens with sweat. He squints at the words, checking for smears or misaligned letters. The ink is still wet and smudges a little as he holds it up to the candlelight. You can smell it, that sharp, metallic, slightly oily scent of fresh print. The words are rough, the grammar awkward in places, but they are here. They are real. The people of St. Louis, whether they realize it or not, now have a printed voice. Of course, most of them don't read English. The town is a mix of French-speaking families, traders, ex-soldiers, and a few enslaved people and free black residents trying to build lives in impossible conditions. It's not exactly a reading town yet, but that doesn't stop Charles. He starts printing weekly, then bi-weekly. He covers shipping reports, prices of beaver pelts, and bits of political opinion that sometimes get him into trouble. In fact, it doesn't take long before someone shoots at his house for printing something they didn't like. You sit there listening to him read an editorial out loud while checking the lock on his door. Historians agreed that the Missouri Gazette, later renamed the Missouri Republican, is the first continuously published newspaper west of the Mississippi. That's your mainstream fact of the evening. But here's your fringe tidbit. According to one persistent local legend, the earliest copies were sometimes used as insulation inside sod homes. Families would paste the pages along interior walls to block out the wind, not realizing they were literally living inside a future archive. Charles doesn't mind. He's not after fame. He's after permanence. He wants to give the West something it doesn't yet have, a printed memory. You lean back in your chair, the fire crackles. The press lets out a groan as another page comes off the platen. Outside, the Mississippi rolls on, slow and silent, carrying driftwood, lost dreams, and the echoes of voices still being written into existence. Joseph Charles straightens his back, rubs his hands together, and nods quietly. The paper is alive. The West has found its voice. You're walking along a narrow road on the outskirts of Dublin, sometime in the early 1790s. The fog clings to your coat, and there's the sound of horses trotting through wet grass nearby. Ireland is restless. People whisper in back alleys, printing seditious pamphlets under candlelight and keeping eyes on doorways. You pass posters half ripped from walls, calling for Irish freedom, for rebellion against British control. These are dangerous times to believe in revolution. And Joseph Charles, still young then, finds himself caught between his trade and his ideals. He's not a soldier. He's not standing with a musket in a line of redcoats. He's a printer, the quiet sort, but even printers have power. Words carry weight, and in this case, they carry risk. He prints something he shouldn't. Historians still argue whether Joseph was simply a bystander or whether he actively supported the doomed uprising of 1795, the same one that would make a martyr of Robert Emmet a few years later. Either way, Joseph is no longer safe. He flees in the night, first to France, where the language is foreign, the government is unstable, and the food, well, let's just say he never developed a taste for snails. You imagine him crossing the English Channel alone and cautious, with only a small pack slung over his shoulder. He's carrying more than belongings. He's carrying knowledge, the ability to operate a press, the skill to arrange language letter by letter, to reproduce not just information, but influence. That's something valuable. Eventually, he finds passage to America. The ship takes weeks. The air below deck is thick and foul, and the waves toss you side to side until you start to wonder if Ireland might not have been that bad after all. But when the ship finally bumps against a dock in New York Harbor, the horizon opens wide. America is chaotic and hopeful. The revolution is over, the country is expanding, and Joseph Charles steps into a world where his trade matters. It's 1796, and he's ready to start again. You follow him to Philadelphia, the bustling heart of American print culture at the time. There he finds work with Matthew Carey, a powerhouse in the industry. Carey is an Irishman too, and perhaps he sees something in Joseph that reminds him of himself. The print shop is crowded and loud, with presses thumping, apprentices yelling, and piles of damp paper drying near the stove. You wipe your brow and try to keep up.
Typesetting is delicate work, especially when you're handling texts like Bibles, political essays, and broadsheets that might start a riot if read the wrong way. It's here that Joseph claims to have printed the first quarto Bible in the United States. That fact has been repeated often, though historians still argue the specifics. Some say another shop beat him to it by a few weeks. Others argue the term quarto was flexible, or that his edition wasn't technically the first, but the most widely read. Either way, it's clear Joseph was part of something important, something sacred. He wasn't just pressing ink onto pages, he was helping to define what this new country would read, believe, and become. Outside, the city hums with energy. Benjamin Franklin's ghost seems to linger in the alleys. Men gather in taverns to argue about the future of democracy. You step into a bookshop where someone's ranting about France, Jefferson, and the price of tobacco. It's all politics, all the time, and Joseph is soaking it in. But Philadelphia is only the beginning. In 1800, Joseph marries Sarah Jordan, a widow from Delaware with a child of her own. She's sharp, practical, and kind, the kind of woman who knows how to stretch a penny and still set a dignified table. The two of them make a strong pair, but Joseph's eyes are already on the horizon. They move westward to Lexington, Kentucky. You ride in a bumpy cart with them across forests and over ridges, the road more suggestion than infrastructure. Lexington is barely more than a cluster of cabins and brick storefronts, but it's a hub for settlers moving into the interior. There, Joseph opens a small printing office. He publishes legal notices, almanacs, and other essentials of early American life. He makes enough to support the growing family, including his son, Joseph Jr., who's born in 1804. Joseph Jr. is a quiet baby, curious, observant, always pulling at his mother's apron or crawling under furniture while his father sets type nearby. You see ink smudges on his cheek and wonder if he's already absorbing more than anyone realizes. He'll grow up surrounded by paper, by the smell of oil-based ink, and the steady rhythm of the press. It'll become his world. But the family doesn't stay long. In 1806, they move again, this time to Louisville. The move is tough, the roads are worse, and the distance from Eastern suppliers makes printing harder. But Joseph pushes through. He keeps publishing, keeps believing. And in 1808, the final leap. He takes the biggest risk of his life and moves to St. Louis, a town without a newspaper, without reliable mail, and without much interest in journalism at all. He packs up the press, the type, the tools, and his family. They cross the Mississippi and step into the unknown. St. Louis is part French, part American, part wilderness. You walk through town and hear 3 languages in 5 minutes. Most people are too busy trapping beavers or avoiding duels to read the news. But Joseph believes they will learn, that they want to read, that they'll need to. You help unload the press onto the wooden sidewalk outside a rented space on Main Street. It's heavy, older than most of the buildings in town, and covered in tarps. People stare, some laugh, but Joseph keeps moving, keeps planning, keeps dreaming. And finally, on July 12, 1808, he prints the first issue of the Missouri Gazette. 4 pages, small type, uneven lines. But the words are there. The town has a voice. And Joseph Charles, the man who once fled across the sea with nothing but a skill and a few convictions, becomes the first voice of the American West.
You're standing in a narrow alley that smells of ink, sweat, and something vaguely burnt. This is Philadelphia in the late 1790s, and the sun is just rising. The print shop is already humming. The wooden floor is stained from years of spilled oil and the soles of hurried boots. You push open the creaky door and are hit with the heat of the hearth and the sharp tang of molten lead. At the center of it all stands Joseph Charles, sleeves rolled up, eyebrows furrowed, adjusting the chase for a new batch of printed pages. He is not just typesetting pamphlets anymore. Today's job is a Bible, a big one, and not just any Bible, but a quarto edition, meaning the sheets are folded twice to make 4 pages per sheet. It's an ambitious layout, heavier paper, a layout that demands precision and skill. This may be the first quarto Bible ever printed in the United States. Historians still debate this, of course. Another press in New Jersey claims they beat him by a few weeks. Some say the term quarto was loosely applied back then, meaning the distinction is more technical than meaningful. But you're here in the room, and there's no denying the intensity with which Joseph treats the job. The press thumps rhythmically like a heartbeat. Apprentices scramble to dry the pages by the stove, occasionally wiping their ink-slicked hands on their aprons or the wall. You watch them work and realize something important. This isn't just labor. This is legacy. What goes on this paper will sit in homes, on pulpits, on court benches. People will read these words and make decisions, raise families, bury the dead. In a world with no internet and no radio, the printed word carries everything. When the Philadelphia job ends, Joseph packs up and sets his sights west. He wants more than the comfort of the established cities. He wants to carve something new from the chaos. He leaves behind bustling markets and cobblestone streets and heads toward Lexington, Kentucky. You ride with him in a creaky wagon. The trip takes weeks. The roads are little more than trails. The wheels jolt over roots and holes. You're bruised and rattled and a little amazed he doesn't turn back. But when you reach Lexington, the land opens into green fields, log homes, and the sharp smell of fresh sawdust. There's a kind of beauty here, a silence that feels full of possibility. Joseph opens a shop and gets to work. He's printing flyers, bulletins, shipping notices, everything a growing town needs. There's no prestige yet, just repetition. In the morning, he sets the type. By noon, the press groans under his weight. In the evening, he walks home with sore arms and blackened fingertips. But there's pride in it. At home, Sarah is managing the household with calm determination. She's not a society wife. She doesn't flinch at dust or delays. She keeps a tight kitchen, saves scraps, and raises their children with the same patience she uses to mend clothes by lantern light. You catch a glimpse of Joseph Jr., a toddler wobbling around the room with a scrap of paper clutched in his fist. He's already fascinated by the shapes on the page. He presses them to his mouth, then the floor, then back again. By 1806, the family moves again, this time to Louisville. It's less refined than Lexington, rougher around the edges. You hear more shouting in the streets, more whiskey sloshing in mugs, and see more knives worn casually on belts. It's a trade town, full of opportunity and confrontation. The print shop is harder to maintain here. Supplies are slow to arrive. Type goes missing. Ink cakes in the heat. But Joseph pushes through. He builds relationships, offers reasonable prices, keeps his paper honest, and people notice. One afternoon, while Joseph was inspecting a newly delivered set of fonts, a knock comes at the door. A wiry man in boots caked with river mud holds out a folded note. The Louisiana Territory, recently acquired by the United States, is opening up. There's land to the west, opportunity, and one growing town in particular needs someone who can read, write, and run a press. St. Louis. The idea grabs Joseph's imagination like a gust of wind to a flame. The town has no newspaper, no steady way to share news, trade prices, or announcements. It's isolated, barely connected to the rest of the world. But that only makes the challenge more tempting. He doesn't hesitate. Within months, he packs his press, his type, his wife, and his children, and they begin the difficult journey west. You ride with them on a narrow riverboat, dodging low branches and swatting at mosquitoes as the Mississippi winds past muddy banks. The heat is thick and unrelenting. Supplies must be rationed. The boat creaks with every mile. But Sarah never complains. She watches the river quietly, her arms around Joseph Jr., whose eyes grow wide at every bird call and splash. When you finally reach St. Louis, the town is more of an outpost than a city. Wooden cabins lean at awkward angles. There are more traders than farmers, more rumors than facts. French is still the dominant language in many homes. Few speak English fluently, and fewer can read it. But Joseph sees potential. He sees a blank page. He finds a space on Main Street and unloads the press. It's hot and dusty. The floorboards creak, the windows rattle in the wind. but the room smells like possibility. The first issue of the Missouri Gazette is dated July 12, 1808. 4 pages long, printed slowly by hand. No headlines, just blocks of text. But it works. It exists. And nothing west of the Mississippi has ever had something quite like it before. There's no cheering crowd, no celebration, but Joseph knows. The press is running, the words are flowing, and the silence of the West is finally being broken. That night, he and Sarah sit by a single candle. She reads the paper aloud, softly, while the children sleep. Joseph leans back in his chair, exhausted but content. This is more than survival. This is foundation. The press clunks to a halt outside the window, and the sound hangs in the air like a closing prayer. The Gazette will continue weekly, slowly gaining readers. Some will paste pages inside their homes to block the wind. Others will wrap fish with it, never reading a word. But a few will listen, a few will change, a few will realize that the wild frontier has a voice now, and Joseph Charles is the one who gave it.
You're in Lexington, Kentucky, and the year is 1804. The summer air hangs heavy over the town square, carrying with it the smell of damp earth, cut wood, and horses that have waited too long in the sun. There's a tension here, the kind that only comes when people know they're living at the edge of something big. Settlers stream in from the east, goods pile up at trading posts, and out in the hills, rumors of new lands farther west grow louder by the day. In a small wooden home at the corner of 2 rutted roads, Joseph Charles holds his newborn son. He names him Joseph, like himself and like the generations before. It's a name carried across the sea, through wars and exile, and now it rests in the curled fingers of a wide-eyed baby. You watch the boy squirm in his mother's arms. He's small but alert, and already he seems to be listening to things no one else hears. The soft clack of type from the next room, the creak of floorboards under his father's boots, the rhythms of paper, ink, and the future. This child, Joseph Jr., will grow up surrounded by books, ledgers, scraps of typeset copy, and the smell of oil and ink. But he'll also grow up fast, because life on the edge of the frontier leaves little room for delay. When he's just 2 years old, the family moves again. You bump along with them in a wagon headed to Louisville. The road is muddy and slow. They stop frequently to repair wheels, calm crying children, and cook meals over open fires. Sarah, his mother, sings softly to keep the little ones calm. Joseph Sr. keeps his eyes on the horizon. Louisville is raw, louder than Lexington, and rougher around the edges. You pass bars with swinging doors and streets lined with stacked crates, sawdust, and livestock. The town pulses with energy, but it's still unstable. And yet the Charles family settles in. Joseph Sr. opens another print shop. He's stubborn that way, always trying again, always starting over. Young Joseph Jr. is just learning to walk. He stumbles between stacks of newspapers and climbs onto the wooden frame of the press when no one is looking. He's the kind of child who watches before he speaks, absorbing every detail. You see him mimicking his father's motions, lifting imaginary trays of type, pretending to inspect pages by candlelight. By the time he's 5, he can recite the alphabet backward, not because someone taught him, but because he saw it once on a typesetter's rack and never forgot. The Charles home is strict, but loving. Sarah is orderly and methodical. She wakes early, keeps the pantry stocked, and ensures the children are never idle. If a boy has time to misbehave, he also has time to chop wood or clean his shoes. She is not stern out of meanness. She believes in hard work, in responsibility, and in the quiet dignity of doing what must be done. Joseph Sr. is softer, more philosophical. He tells stories at dinner, shares bits of scripture, and teaches by example. You watch him give bread to a hungry stranger one evening, no questions asked, then come home and edit an editorial that criticizes greed in business. He lives what he prints. Their son grows up in this mix of order and purpose. And like all children, he's got a bit of mischief in him. You find out quickly that Joseph Jr. isn't a saint. He's clever and occasionally stubborn. He argues with his mother. He sneaks extra biscuits when no one is looking. And one day, in a moment that becomes family legend, he's punished for some now forgotten offense and locked in a room that happens to be filled with fresh-made cheeses. He's told to sit and reflect. Instead, he bites a piece out of every single cheese, one after the other. When his mother opens the door, she doesn't find remorse. She finds a tiny boy, cheeks puffed with dairy rebellion. Historians tend to gloss over that part. But he's more than mischievous. He's brave. One day he wanders too far from home and falls into a spring. The cold water shocks his small body. You rush forward with the family as they pull him out, coughing and blue, and for a moment, the world stills. Sarah weeps. Joseph Sr. wraps him in dry blankets and holds him by the fire. The boy lives, but something shifts. He learns fear, and he learns that being small doesn't make him safe. Later, when they've moved once again, this time to St. Louis, young Joseph finds a new way to tempt fate. He goes swimming in the Mississippi with other boys, despite being told not to. The current pulls him into a whirlpool, and he nearly drowns. He remembers sinking, spinning, the light fading, but another boy grabs him and pulls him to shore. It's a close call. When he gets home, soaked and shivering, he weeps not because he almost died, but because he knows he disobeyed. He says, through tears, "It would have broken my mother's heart." You remember that moment later, much later, when he becomes a father himself and warns his own children about the river. At 10, Joseph Jr. begins working in his father's print shop. He's too small to run the press alone, but he cleans, organizes type, and watches. You notice he's careful with everything. He places each letter back in the correct slot. He checks for spelling errors even when no one asks him to. At night, he stays up late reading scraps of discarded pages. Some are political speeches, some are sermons, some are just lists of sugar shipments. But to him, they're all windows into a wider world. Louisiana Territory has now been purchased, and St. Louis is slowly becoming more American than French. Traders come and go, fur, tobacco, whiskey. The city is beginning to find its shape, but there's still no central communication, no city hall, no daily update, no identity. And so the Gazette, the family paper, becomes a kind of heartbeat. Joseph Jr. grows up with that rhythm. He learns not only to print, but to think. He watches as people react to editorials, to letters from Washington, to sermons printed in full. He hears neighbors argue about phrasing, overhears debates about religion, slavery, land rights. He sees the power his father holds, and the danger too. One day, a man fires a shot through the Charles home. No one is hit, but everyone hears it. The newspaper had published something controversial. No one will say exactly what. Maybe it was about land deeds, maybe about abolition, maybe just a misquote. But it's enough to turn disagreement into violence. Joseph Jr. never forgets the sound of that bullet, and it's likely that moment cements something inside him. The understanding that ideas are dangerous, but also that they are worth printing anyway. And so this quiet boy with ink on his fingers, who once bit every cheese in a locked room, begins to imagine a life not far from his father's, not just of paper and print, but of words that matter.
You wake to the clatter of chickens in the yard and the distant ring of a blacksmith's hammer. The Charles household is already stirring, and inside, little Joseph Jr. is about to cause just enough trouble to become memorable. He's maybe 6 or 7 now, with a head full of ideas and a streak of rebellion that makes even the cat nervous. His mother, Sarah, is already 2 steps ahead. She's dealt with stubborn children before.
But Joseph Jr. seems to combine charm and defiance in equal parts, which, frankly, is a dangerous cocktail in a child. You watch as she tries to discipline him one afternoon. He's done something again, maybe ignored a chore, maybe snapped at a sibling, and she ties him to the bedpost with a length of twine. Not tightly, just enough to keep him in one place until he's ready to apologize. He glares, pulls, then, brace yourself, starts gnawing the twine like a squirrel caught in a net. By the time she returns, he's chewed clean through it and is hiding under the bed, triumphant. You have to laugh. Even Sarah does, though she tries not to. There's another story she loves to tell. One day, Joseph Jr. is locked in the cheese room, punished for some mischief. Fresh wheels of cheese line the shelves, waiting to dry. Minutes later, he knocks and says he's ready to apologize. But when Sarah opens the door, she gasps. The boy has taken a bite, just one, out of every single cheese. Historians don't write about that moment, but if they did, it might say more about the future of American journalism than we think. Joseph Jr. is not mean-spirited. He's good-natured and mischievous, a blend of energy and curiosity. You see him slip out of the house often, chasing butterflies, following older boys, or just exploring. And one day, he wanders too far, down to the spring near the edge of town. The water is clear, still, and inviting. He leans in, maybe to touch it or just see his reflection, and slips. The world flips. The surface closes over him. Cold rushes into his ears. You hear the shouts. You run. A neighbor pulls him out, coughing and pale. His mother screams, clutching him to her chest, soaked and shaking. The boy survives. But from that day, he never walks near water alone. Something about that moment brands itself deep into his bones. You'd think that would be enough to cure him of risk, but it doesn't quite. Years later, now living in St. Louis, he joins a group of older boys for a swim in the Mississippi River. It's forbidden, of course. His parents had warned him, but when has that ever stopped boys with bare feet and too much energy? The current that day is fast and deceptive. The water looks calm at the surface, but underneath it twists like rope. Joseph dives in and is instantly swept into a whirlpool. It's quick, too quick. 1 second he's laughing, the next he's gone, swallowed by the muddy water. You hold your breath as long as he does, but he doesn't come back up. Then, out of nowhere, another boy jumps in, bigger, stronger, better at swimming. He grabs Joseph by the arm and hauls him to the shore. He's unconscious when they lay him down. The other boys are shouting. A man arrives with a blanket. Someone prays aloud. Slowly, Joseph coughs. He's alive. When he gets home, still dripping, his mother doesn't yell. She just holds him. And Joseph sobs. Through tears, he repeats, "I disobeyed." It would have broken her heart. That moment softens something in him. He still plays, still explores, but you can tell he thinks more now, about consequences, about people. But Joseph Jr.'s world isn't just one of near drownings and cheese sabotage. He's also growing up in a place buzzing with new energy. St. Louis is changing. The Louisiana Purchase has brought Americans in waves. French settlers mingle with English traders. Spanish phrases mixed with German ones at the markets. And in the middle of it all, a printing press thumps like a slow drumbeat from a small wooden building on Main Street. The Missouri Gazette is growing. Joseph Sr. prints not just news, but notices about ships arriving, goods for sale, marriages, obituaries, laws, sermons. The Gazette becomes a central pillar of the town. It also becomes controversial. The editorials, though careful, sometimes ruffle feathers. One day, Joseph is helping clean the front window of the press room when a shot rings out. A bullet crashes through the glass. No one is hurt, but the message is clear. Someone did not like what was printed. The boy freezes. His hands tremble. And though he doesn't speak of it much, he remembers that sound forever. Years later, people will say he carried a quiet caution about the power of words. He knew they could heal, inform, stir, but also inflame. At school, Joseph is an average student, but at home, he becomes something else. He begins typesetting simple pages on his own. His father gives him scraps to practice with. He learns to proofread and arrange lines with balance. On slow days at the shop, Joseph Sr. lets him experiment with small notices. You watch as the boy holds a single line of lead type in his hand like it's a precious artifact. He reads everything he prints, then reads it again. One evening, his mother finds him reading by firelight, the paper nearly touching his nose. "Rest your eyes, child," she says. But he doesn't. He's lost in someone else's sermon printed last week, trying to decide whether it was truly wise or just wordy. You might wonder how a boy like that plays. The truth is, he plays like other boys. Stick duels, races, jokes, dares. But something in him is always observing. While others yell, Joseph listens. While they fight, he watches. Not because he's scared, but because he's curious. And he has stories, of course he does. There's one about a French boy, a pancake eating contest, and someone getting sick behind a haystack. Another about a dancing bear in the town square. Another about an old Indian man known for stealing chickens. One day, young Joseph waits on the second floor of his house with dried squashes in his hand. When the old man walks by, he hurls one down and hits him squarely on the shoulder. He laughs, peeks out the window for a better view. But the man is ready. An arrow flies up, nearly grazing the boy's cheek and embedding itself into the wooden beam above his head. The boy stumbles backward, shaken. He doesn't try that trick again. These moments aren't written in history books, but they matter. They show the boy behind the man. A boy who would one day grow into a publisher, a protector of words, and a quiet leader in a noisy world.
You walk through the streets of early St. Louis in the humid summer of 1808. It's not a city yet, not really. More like a layered cluster of ambition, trade, and dust. The streets are rutted and uneven. You sidestep mud puddles and hear 3 languages within 5 minutes: French, Spanish, and English. None of them completely comfortable here yet. The Mississippi River curls nearby, sluggish and wide, moving past the town like a lazy beast, not quite sure it wants to stay. And then you hear it, a deep wooden groan, followed by a rhythmic thunk. It's a sound this town has never heard before, the sound of a press at work. You turn the corner and see a man bent over a block of inked type. Joseph Charles. His shirt is soaked through with sweat. His sleeves are rolled to his elbows. His hands are stained black. He's focused, like a sculptor chipping at stone. Around him are racks of wooden letters, bottles of thick ink, and stacks of blank paper waiting to be filled. The printing press he's using is a simple screw-style model, heavy and ancient by modern standards, but it works, and that's what matters. This is the first issue of the Missouri Gazette, the first newspaper west of the Mississippi. A historic fact, and yet, in this moment, it feels more personal than monumental. You stand quietly as he pulls the handle down with a long creak, the platen pressing the type into the paper. When he lifts it, he peels the first sheet free. It's not perfect, a little smudged, the ink uneven in places, but it's there. Real. 4 pages of news, announcements, and editorials. And just like that, the West has a printed voice. Outside, few people notice. A boy chases a dog past the doorway. A French trader argues about fur prices with an American merchant. No one is rushing to buy this first issue. Most people here can't even read. Some don't speak English, but Joseph believes that they will, eventually. Because words are seeds, and newspapers are the soil where public ideas take root. You sit down inside as he lays out the next sheet. The Gazette will publish weekly for now. That's as much as he can manage. He sets columns by hand, he mixes his own ink, he sharpens his own blades and repairs the press when it misbehaves. Every edition is a labor of willpower. At first, the articles are simple:
weather updates, prices of grain and tobacco, letters from the East, official notices about land deals, marriages, and deaths. It may seem plain, but for a town like this, it's everything. Before now, people relied on rumors and word of mouth. Now they have something to hold, to reference, to argue with. That's power, and it's spreading. You notice something else as you walk around the shop. Stacks of rejected sheets, thrown aside because of a crooked line or a bad inking. Joseph is a perfectionist, but not in the obsessive way, more in the way that says, if this is going to speak for the people, it better be worth hearing. He's not working alone, of course. Apprentices run errands. His wife Sarah manages the household and helps gather community news. Sometimes she brings the children by. Little Joseph Jr. watches the press with wide eyes, fingers twitching as if he's imagining how it all fits together. You see him pointing to the letters on the type rack, mouthing the words, matching shapes to sounds. A printer's son through and through. But not everyone is thrilled about the Gazette. Some think it's unnecessary. Others worry it's dangerous. You hear whispers in the market. That paper said too much about the governor. Charles should mind his own business. One man, half drunk and red-faced, spits on a discarded copy, calling it Eastern garbage. Historians still argue whether Charles was intentionally provocative or simply principled. He printed what he believed people needed to know, not always what they wanted to hear. That kind of courage earns you both friends and enemies. And in the early frontier, enemies don't send letters, they send threats or bullets. You stay late one evening in the shop helping fold the finished edition. The press is quiet now, just the sound of crickets outside and the occasional creak of the wood settling. Charles lights a lamp and sits down to write a short editorial. His handwriting is slow and steady. The topic tonight is civic responsibility, a call for people to show up at the town meeting next week, to be involved, to help shape the future of this place. It doesn't sound radical to you, but here, even encouraging citizens to speak up feels like rebellion. This town has long operated on quiet deals, unwritten rules, and power that moves behind doors. A newspaper challenges all of that. The next morning, copies of the Gazette are nailed to posts, slipped under doors, handed out to shopkeepers, and slowly they begin to circulate. People read them aloud in taverns, translators repeat the content in French or German, and like that, the Gazette becomes not just a source of information, but a spark for discussion, debate, identity. There's a strange beauty to watching something so quiet cause such a stir. And you learn another strange truth. Some of those early issues, the very first printings of the Gazette, don't end up in archives or libraries. They end up pasted on the inside walls of cabins to block the cold wind. Others are used to wrap food or start fires. It's a little heartbreaking, but also poetic. The words warm homes one way or another. Charles doesn't complain. He just keeps printing, week after week. And even when the supplies run low or the press breaks or someone sends him a threatening note, he keeps going. Because this isn't about one man's career. It's about building a voice in a place that's barely more than a whisper. You sit beside him as he folds another stack of papers. Outside, rain begins to patter on the roof. He smiles, tired but satisfied. The Gazette is alive, the press is steady, and for the first time in this wild, unfinished corner of America, the people have something that belongs to them. A paper with their name on it, their language, their stories. And the journey of journalism in the American West has officially begun.
You wake up to the sound of hooves splashing through muddy ruts, and somewhere nearby, a cow is very unhappy about the weather. It's another gray morning in St. Louis, but inside the Charles print shop, the ink still smells rich and bitter, and the press is already groaning with the day's work. Joseph Charles doesn't get to rest just because the sky looks gloomy. News waits for no one, especially not on the frontier. You sit with him as he reviews a letter just delivered by horseback from the east. The pages are creased, damp, but still legible. It's a report from Washington, full of updates on trade disputes, territorial negotiations, and something about a senator's scandalous comments. Charles reads it slowly, then folds it and sets it on a pile labeled Maybe. It's a stack you're beginning to understand well. Too dull, too far away, or too risky. It all goes into maybe. But then you see his eyes light up at a different letter. This one comes from a preacher in town, detailing a revival that drew in over 300 people. Now that, Joseph thinks, the people will want to read. He edits it lightly and begins laying it into the layout. This is what the Gazette has become, a blend of frontier life and national importance, a mix of politics, sermons, and community bulletins. Historians often wonder if Charles leaned more toward religion or politics, but it's clear he treated both with a sense of sacred duty. He knew that shaping public thought wasn't just about what happened in Congress. It was also about what happened at weddings, sermons, and in muddy town meetings. You follow him into one of those meetings now. It's late afternoon, and a dozen or so men have gathered in a dusty room that smells like leather and wet coats. They argue over taxes, road conditions, and grain prices. Charles listens quietly, then speaks. His voice is calm, but carries weight. He suggests publishing minutes from the meeting in the Gazette. Some men grumble, but others nod. "Sunshine is the best disinfectant," he says. "You file that one away." That's a good line. Back at the shop, young Joseph Jr. is sweeping the floor. He's older now, maybe 12, and the broom is almost taller than he is. He doesn't complain, though. He just sweeps around the press, watching the ink dry and asking questions about how to proof columns or why this letter goes here and not there. He's curious about every detail. You see him trace the curve of a capital G with his finger, lips moving as he repeats the line it starts. Sometimes he gets to help with the press itself. Not full pages, he's still too small for that, but he can load paper, mix ink, and sort type. He does it with a seriousness that would make you think he was handling gold. And in a way, he is. In this world, words are currency, influence, identity, and this boy is learning how to craft them by hand. One evening, after the shop closes, Joseph Sr. sits his son down for a lesson, not about printing, but about character. You sit nearby, pretending not to listen. He speaks softly. "You can be clever, son, but if you are not kind, it will all rot in your hands. There are men with 10 times your wit who die with no friends and no peace." Joseph Jr. nods, not fully understanding yet, but something about the weight in his father's voice makes him remember the words anyway. Outside, trouble is always near. One morning, a rumor spreads through town that the Gazette has printed something offensive. You find the paper. It's an editorial about land rights and unfair pricing in the market. Nothing that extreme, really, but apparently someone powerful took it personally. You walk into the shop and find broken glass on the floor. Someone's thrown a rock through the window. Charles picks it up, inspects it, sets it gently on the counter, and gets back to printing. No panic, no anger, just ink and paper. The frontier is wild, he reminds you, but we don't have to be. It's around this time that a subtle shift begins to take place. The Gazette isn't just a newspaper anymore. It's becoming the thread that stitches this fragile community together. You see people referencing it in arguments, quoting it in letters, using its birth announcements and obituaries like holy records. And in a place where memories are short and news is long in traveling, that kind of permanence is rare and powerful. Sometimes the shop feels like a courthouse, other times a chapel. People wander in not just to read, but to talk, to ask, to confess. Joseph listens to all of it. He doesn't always print what they say, but he files it away, knowing that sometimes the truth doesn't fit neatly in columns. One man comes in asking if the Gazette will publish a notice about his missing cow. Another brings news of a preacher's sudden death. A woman asks for help writing a letter to her son in Ohio. And on a slow Tuesday, someone brings a wild rumor that Napoleon has landed in America. It's not true, of course,
But Charles lets the man talk anyway, nodding, scribbling notes, because every voice has weight. Every story deserves air. And just as you begin to think things have stabilized, war creeps into the picture. The War of 1812 breaks out, and suddenly the Gazette is flooded with reports, some true, some not. You help sift through them. There are letters from soldiers, updates from government offices, and wild claims about British forces headed for St. Louis. Panic flickers at the edges of every page. Historians still debate whether Charles downplayed the war to avoid mass fear, or whether he genuinely believed it wouldn't reach this far west. Either way, he prints carefully. Enough to inform, not enough to inflame. It's a delicate line, and one not every editor knows how to walk. During this time, the Gazette also starts including poetry, humor columns, and short essays, not because it's trying to entertain, but because people need to breathe. In the middle of fear, it offers laughter. In the chaos of war, it offers reflection. Joseph Jr. reads these pieces with growing interest. He begins writing little stories of his own, hiding them under the mattress. You sneak a peek one night. It's about a fox that becomes mayor of a town full of chickens, a little rough around the edges, but full of clever turns and unexpected warmth. You smile. The boy's got it. Not just the technical skill, but the heart. And you realize, as the shop lights dim and the last pages are stacked, that you're watching something rare. Not just the birth of a newspaper, but the quiet shaping of a soul who understands that ideas matter, that words, when carefully chosen, can build a town or save it.
You wake to the sound of hammers again, but this time it isn't the press thudding alone. It's construction. St. Louis is changing. You glance out the window and see new storefronts being raised, steamboats docking along the muddy riverbank, and people, so many people, flowing into the city like water through a widened pipe. Some are trappers returning from the Rockies, some are merchants heading west, and others are just dreamers, chasing the idea of a new beginning. It's the early 1820s, and the frontier is starting to look like something more permanent. Inside the Gazette office, the press is still running strong, though the ink now smells different, cleaner maybe, and the paper comes in heavier stacks. Joseph Charles is older, his beard streaked with gray, but his eyes are the same, watchful, measured, a little tired. He sits at his desk, scanning letters from all directions. You realize the Gazette isn't just reporting on St. Louis anymore, it's reporting for the entire territory. People from as far as Arkansas and Illinois write in. Some send money wrapped in cloth, asking for a year's subscription. Others simply ask to be mentioned, remembered. Births, deaths, land disputes, personal victories. In a world still without radio or phones, this paper is their voice, their confirmation that they exist. One morning, Charles receives a request that makes him pause. A man accused of something vile wants to publish a public defense. Joseph reads the letter twice. Then again, there are parts that seem sincere. Others feel like an attempt to sway public opinion. He sighs and sets the letter down. This, you realize, is one of the hard lines of printing. What gets space? What deserves silence? Historians still argue whether early printers like Charles leaned into their own biases or genuinely tried to stay neutral. You see him weigh every word. This isn't just about printing ink on paper. It's about moral responsibility. But St. Louis is not without tension. Political shifts are happening. People are debating slavery, statehood, property rights. Tempers flare easily. And the Gazette, being the oldest and most respected paper west of the Mississippi, is caught in the middle. Joseph receives more and more anonymous letters, some urging him to print the truth, others warning him to keep quiet. One letter arrives sealed with no name. Inside, a single sentence. You write one more thing about the governor, and you'll regret it. Joseph doesn't flinch. He doesn't even mention it to anyone. He just files it away and moves on. But you see the way he locks the shop door more carefully that night. The weight of words is growing heavier.
Young Joseph Jr., now in his late teens, is working full-time at the Gazette. He's no longer just sweeping floors or loading paper. He's writing short editorials, helping with layout, debating headlines with his father. The two often disagree. You listen to them in the back room arguing over whether to use the word inflamed or angered in a story about a local riot. Joseph Sr. prefers restraint. Joseph Jr. wants to stir the pot. They find a compromise, deeply provoked. It's not flashy, but it's accurate. Sometimes they fight harder. One night, Joseph Jr. storms out, muttering about censorship. His father doesn't stop him. He just sits there, rubbing his temples, whispering, "He'll learn." Outside, the world is moving fast. Missouri becomes a state in 1821. There are new governors, new laws, new schools. The Gazette covers it all. Charles prints the full state constitution, line by line, with footnotes. It takes up nearly an entire edition. Some readers complain, but others save it, fold it under mattresses, tucked in trunks, passed down. It becomes, quite literally, the paper record of law for people who may never see a courthouse. You begin to notice something else. The Gazette isn't flashy. It doesn't use large fonts or scandalous headlines, but its power lies in consistency. Week after week, no matter the weather or war or rumor, it prints. That rhythm becomes a kind of heartbeat for the town. People begin to rely on it, like sunrise or the ringing of the church bell. And then one evening, Joseph Sr. makes a decision that stuns you. He's stepping down. You sit with him as he drafts the announcement. He writes simply, "It has been my privilege to serve the people of this place with honesty and diligence, but my years are advancing, and it is time to pass the press into younger hands." He doesn't name a successor just yet. He's not even sure who it should be. Joseph Jr. is the obvious choice, but their disagreements still hang in the air. You watch the son read the printed announcement the next morning. He doesn't say a word, just folds the paper in half and walks out of the room. In the following weeks, the Gazette shifts slightly. New voices contribute articles. Guest editors help out. Joseph Sr. focuses on mentoring rather than managing. He spends long afternoons walking through town, talking with merchants, listening to children sing outside the school. He seems lighter. Not because he's given up his work, but because he's passed it on. And the town notices. One man stops him on the street and says, "Your words taught me how to think." Another presses his hand and says, "Because of your Gazette, I voted last year." Charles smiles, nods, moves along. Not everyone loves him, of course. Some still call him stubborn, too cautious, too moralistic. But even they admit the paper wouldn't have survived this long without him. One rainy afternoon, Joseph Jr. returns from a short trip and finds his father alone in the shop. The place smells of damp ink and sawdust. They speak softly. Apologies, questions, and then plans. Together they begin outlining the future of the Gazette. New features, expanded reach, even the idea of daily editions. And you sit in the corner, smiling, because what you're seeing isn't just the transfer of a job. It's the passing of a torch, a legacy not wrapped in gold or land, but in type and truth. The press doesn't stop. It won't stop. And as you help prepare the next edition, you know that even as the town grows and changes, the voice Joseph Charles created will echo long after he's gone. Because in the end, he didn't just print a paper. He built a conscience for a place still learning how to use one.
You're back in the shop just before dawn. The lamps cast a low golden glow on the paper stacks and typecases, and outside, St. Louis is still stretching awake. Inside, it feels like nothing has changed. But everything has. The press still groans the same way it did 15 years ago. The scent of ink is still sharp and earthy. But now it's Joseph Jr. who bends over the layout, sleeves rolled, eyes narrowed.
His father is nearby, slower now, content to advise from his chair, not command from the bench. You notice a subtle difference in posture. Joseph Sr. used to lean into the work like a man pushing a wheel uphill. Joseph Jr. carries it like a torch, upright and swift. There's a confidence in his edits, a rhythm in his typesetting, a certain brightness in the way he signs his name to editorials. You sit quietly, watching a new generation of the Gazette emerge not through revolution, but through subtle shifts. Where once the pages were dominated by raw updates and cautious opinion, now there's a fresh urgency, a broader world view. International news finds its way into the margins. Literature from the East Coast appears beside local obituaries. Satire, once rare, starts slipping into small columns. One day, you notice a humorous piece, poking fun at a local politician's bizarre choice in hats. A statement of fabric, if not of policy, it says. It draws laughter at the taverns and furrows at City Hall. Joseph Jr. grins, but his father only half smiles. Ink stings longer than you think, he warns. Still, the town changes with the Gazette. Or maybe the Gazette changes with the town. It's hard to tell. Outside, the streets are widening. Brick buildings replace log cabins. The muddy lanes are slowly being cobbled. A bank opens, a new school, and the Gazette reports on it all, not as an outsider watching progress, but as a participant, shaping it. You walk with Joseph Jr. one afternoon to deliver an issue to the mayor's office. Along the way, he stops to help a young boy who's lost a page of his schoolwork. He kneels, helps gather the papers, and hands over a folded copy of the Gazette. "This might help with your history report," he says with a wink. This isn't just about journalism anymore. It's about trust. The Gazette is no longer just a publication. It's a pillar. The kind of thing people build habits around: coffee, church, and Charles's paper. But behind that stability, trouble still brews. A rival paper begins printing in the city, backed with moneyed interests with flashier headlines and political leanings. They criticize the Gazette, call it old-fashioned, accuse it of playing both sides. Their editorials are louder, bolder, sometimes reckless. Joseph Jr. doesn't flinch. He simply responds the way his father taught him, through consistency. He prints rebuttals without slander. He cites sources. He encourages open letters from readers, even critical ones. "Let the people speak," he says. "The truth doesn't need a drum, just daylight." Historians still argue whether this rivalry helped elevate the Gazette or dragged it into unnecessary drama. But there's no denying it sharpened Joseph Jr.'s voice. You can feel it in his writing. It's more assertive now, more willing to name problems. One piece about corruption in local trade makes waves all the way to Jefferson City. And then there's the sermon. It arrives one Sunday in the form of a letter from a traveling preacher, a warning about moral decay, urging readers to repent and prepare. It's fire and brimstone stuff, a far cry from the Gazette's usual even tone. Joseph Jr. hesitates. He reads it out loud to his father. The elder Charles listens, then says, "Do you agree with it?" "I'm not sure," his son replies. "Then print it and answer it." So the next issue contains the full sermon, followed by an editorial from Joseph Jr., gently disagreeing but respecting the urgency. It sparks days of discussion. Letters pour in, some praising the Gazette's courage, others furious at its softness. But Joseph Jr. doesn't regret it. He says, "I'd rather be a mirror than a megaphone." You spend evenings in the shop watching father and son trade thoughts across the table. The conversations aren't just about stories anymore. They're about meaning, legacy, and the strange shape of influence. Joseph Sr. often quotes scripture. Joseph Jr. responds with poetry or political theory. But always, always there's respect. One night, the elder Charles places his hand on the press and says, "This machine,
It doesn't care who's in charge, but it remembers everything. Every lie, every truth. It holds us accountable, quietly. Then he turns to his son, smiles and adds, "And now it's yours." The formal transition is small. No banquet, no speeches, just a printed notice buried on page 2. Joseph Charles Jr. assumes full editorial responsibilities of the Missouri Gazette. And just like that, a chapter ends and another begins. You think back to that first day, to the smudged ink, the tired eyes, the quiet determination. And now you see it reborn in younger hands. A different voice, yes, but speaking from the same deep place of care. The Gazette begins printing new features, profiles of immigrants, poems by schoolchildren, columns on science and inventions. It starts to reflect not just the news, but the hopes of a town trying to find its identity. But in the quiet moments, Joseph Jr. still returns to the shop at night to check the presses, to walk the creaky floors, to sit in his father's old chair. You join him once, and he says, "The words, they outlive us." That's both the comfort and the curse. And maybe he's right. Because now when you walk the streets of St. Louis, you don't just see a growing town, you hear its heartbeat in every rustle of the Gazette's pages.
It's a Sunday morning, and for once, the press is quiet. No ink, no clatter of metal, no pages to fold. The Charles family is seated in church wooden pews worn smooth by generations of sitting. Joseph Sr. leans slightly forward, fingers laced, eyes closed in concentration as the minister speaks. Joseph Jr. sits beside him, upright, thoughtful. The two men don't say much to each other in these moments, but the silence between them is full of understanding. You watch as the minister quotes from Proverbs, something about the tongue being a flame. Joseph Jr. smiles faintly. He knows that better than most. Words, after all, are his profession. They can light a hearth or a city. After the service, the town gathers outside, as they always do. Church isn't just for God. It's where people trade stories, bake bread, pass around babies, and whisper the latest gossip. One man asked Joseph Jr. if the Gazette will print the story about the steamboat fire. Another woman wants a recipe from her late mother's journal published, apple pie with a crust that floats like a hymn. Joseph promises to consider it. This is how news happens now, not from great pronouncements, but from shared lives. Births, marriages, arguments, floods. The Gazette absorbs it all like a thirsty sponge. But as peaceful as it seems, the world is changing, and fast. You see it in the stacks of letters arriving from the east. There's talk of expansion, of railroads and industrial machines. There's chatter about abolition, about rights and representation. There's a hum of movement, of unrest. The Missouri Gazette can no longer afford to be just a local paper. It has to become a mirror for the nation's growing pains. Joseph Jr. understands this instinctively. He begins writing longer-form editorials, essays really, about ethics, about national issues filtered through a frontier lens. He writes one piece about the creeping danger of political apathy. A free man who does not think, he writes, is already half a subject. It's bold, and people notice. Some say he's too philosophical. Others say he's finally living up to his father's reputation. Historians still debate whether Joseph Jr. elevated the Gazette to new heights or slowly made it less accessible to everyday readers. But what's certain is that it became more than just a paper. It became a conversation. The shop itself changes. More apprentices come, the staff expands. There's now a dedicated typesetter, a delivery boy, even someone handling correspondence full-time. You watch as Joseph oversees the team like a conductor, calm, clear, with just enough sarcasm to keep things human. "Don't smudge the truth," he says once to a new printer fumbling with ink. The boy laughs, then pauses, then gets the line.
Joseph smiles. And yet, even as the Gazette gains power, Joseph Jr. doesn't grow arrogant. If anything, he grows more contemplative. One night, he stands at the press alone, fingers tracing its iron frame. "It's not the words," he whispers. "It's the silence between them that shapes people." You wonder if he's thinking about his father, now rarely in the shop. Joseph Sr. spends more time at home, tending the garden, writing letters, reading scripture. His health is fine, mostly, but his world is smaller now, and that's okay. He built what he needed to build. One afternoon, the elder Charles returns to the Gazette for a visit. The staff hushes as he walks in, as if a monument just wandered in from the past. He nods, inspects the presses, touches the type with gentle reverence. Joseph Jr. hands him the latest edition. "I don't agree with this part," the elder says, pointing to a sharp critique of a government official. "I know," his son replies. There's a long pause. "But it's well written," the father adds, and that's the highest praise you'll hear from him today. Outside, the city grows. Steamboats bring immigrants, peddlers, and preachers. The streets buzz with movement. A telegraph line is rumored to be coming soon, and with it, the speed of communication will change forever. The Gazette prepares. Joseph Jr. begins adjusting schedules. He assigns people to monitor incoming messages. He worries that the days of slow, careful news are fading. "The faster it comes," he mutters one evening, "the harder it is to tell what matters." And he's right. Information is becoming a flood, not a trickle. And yet the Gazette tries to hold the line. It still prints sermons besides science. It still values the farmer's weather report as much as the senator's speech. One day, a boy bursts in with a note. A major treaty has been signed back east. News is spreading like fire. Joseph reads the message, nods, then walks to the press. "We'll run it, but we'll run the full treaty text, not just the gossip." "But it'll take up 2 whole pages," someone complains. "So let it." You help set the type, long hours, tiny letters, ink in your fingernails. But when it's done, you feel the weight of it. Not just the news, but the act of printing it properly, fully, with respect. And readers notice. That week, more letters arrived than ever before. Some grateful, some outraged, some confused. But they all read it, and that means something. In the quiet after the deadline, Joseph Jr. leans back in his chair, sipping bitter coffee from a tin cup. "Truth isn't always convenient," he says, "but it should at least be legible." You chuckle. He looks at you. "What, too serious?" "Maybe. But it's that seriousness that built this paper, that kept it alive, that shaped a town." And as the presses rest and the candles burn low, you realize something. You're not just watching the story of a newspaper. You're watching the story of how an entire region learned to think aloud.
It's summer in St. Louis, and the air is heavy with the smell of river mud, roasted peanuts, and ink. You step into the Gazette office and immediately feel the warmth clinging to the walls. The press sweats too, groaning louder in the heat, its gears sticking just slightly more than usual, but it still runs, because it has to. Outside, you hear the sounds of progress. There are hammer strikes from the new rail depot, laughter from children near the schoolhouse, and the hiss of steam from a riverboat headed to New Orleans. But inside, something else brews tension. Joseph Jr. has been working long hours. His editorials have taken a sharper tone lately. One particularly blistering piece critiques the local court for favoritism in a property dispute involving freedmen. It's eloquent, yes, but scathing and dangerous. You notice how he now double-checks the shop door at night, keeps his coat on a peg near the back exit. Then one morning, a letter arrives with no return address. Inside is a page torn from the Gazette with 3 words written in thick pencil: "You've gone too far." He doesn't show it to the others. He just folds it up, slips it into his pocket, and gets back to typesetting. But you saw his hand tremble for a second. Historians still debate whether the threats Joseph Jr. received during this period came from political adversaries or angry townsfolk who feared change. Maybe both. But they came. And yet, the Gazette cut printing. Not just about politics anymore. There are articles about education reform, about prison conditions, about science and invention. One week he prints a drawing of a strange machine, a mechanical reaper. Another, he reprints a speech from a woman in New York calling for equal rights. These are bold moves. He knows it. Isn't that a little risky? Someone asks. Everything worth printing usually is, he replies. You begin to see the Gazette as less of a frontier paper and more of a conscience on paper. It challenges readers. Sometimes it annoys them. Sometimes it moves them to tears. It doesn't just tell the news. It asks what kind of people they want to be. But it's not all lofty ideas and politics. There's still humor, still humanity. One day, a farmer writes in about a chicken that's laid 27 eggs in a week. Joseph Jr. prints the letter under the headline, "Foul play?" The town erupts with laughter. Someone responds claiming their goat has learned to climb stairs. The Gazette runs that too. This is the balance. Big questions, small joys, and family. You find Joseph Jr. with his own children now, 2 boys and a girl. They run through the press room on weekends, playing with scraps of paper, pretending to run their own paper. He watches them from his desk, eyes soft, smile half hidden. The cycle continues. One afternoon, his daughter climbs onto his lap and points to the giant metal press. Will that still be here when I'm old? He pauses. If someone keeps loving it, he says, and you know he means it. Meanwhile, the city grows. You see it in the skyline, in the crowds, in the complexity of life. Crime rates rise, immigration increases, neighborhoods begin to segregate by wealth, by background, by fear. It's no longer just a small town. It's a young city with growing pains. And the Gazette grows too. It starts running more pages, experimenting with serialized fiction. One summer, a mystery story captivates the town. People buy the paper just to see what happens next. Readers send in theories. Joseph Jr. starts printing his favorites at the bottom of the next chapter. It's fun and strategic. People are talking, reading, writing, engaging. Then, tragedy strikes. A fire breaks out in the Southern District. Dozens of homes lost, families displaced. The Gazette staff works overnight to compile names, stories, and needs. By morning, they print a special issue, not just with news, but with donation instructions, open offers of housing, and even a list of missing pets. People rush to the Gazette office, not to complain, but to help. One woman brings in clothes. A child offers a jar of saved pennies. This is the power of the paper, not in ink, but in impact. And it changes Joseph Jr. again. He begins including a new section, Community Notes, where people can request help, offer services, share resources. It's messy at first, unorganized, but it becomes a lifeline for many. And still, he prints the politics, still questions leaders, still praises virtue where it is found. But now he balances it with service, with a clear intent to bind the city's wounds, not just expose them. You see him late one evening, sitting by candlelight writing the next edition's closing thought. He writes slowly, deliberately, then reads it aloud. Let us remember, neighbors, that a city is not built only by bricks, but by bonds. He signs it simply, J.C. No grand title, no ego, just the initials of a man carrying forward a legacy. And that night, as the city rests and the press cools, you realize something simple but profound. The Gazette is no longer just the voice of the Charles family.
It's the voice of St. Louis itself, flawed, hopeful, stubborn, kind, and it still has so much more to say.
You stand by the front window of the Charles home just before dawn, watching pale light gather behind the chimneys of St. Louis. Inside, the house is quiet, the kind of silence that belongs only to early mornings and deep faith. There's a Bible on the table, a hymn book beside it, and somewhere down the hall, you hear the faint creak of a floorboard. Joseph Jr. is already awake. In recent years, something gentle but profound has taken root in this house. Not just routine, not just responsibility, but a living, breathing sense of faith. It started quietly, a conversation here, a borrowed sermon there. Joseph Jr. had never been irreligious. He respected his parents' devotion, nodded politely during sermons, but this was different. This was a turning. Charlotte, his wife, had been the first to sense it. Her own heart pulled more and more toward the scripture, toward prayer, toward moments of stillness that stretched longer each day. She would rise early, open her Bible, and let her fingers rest on the page like it was warm stone. Sometimes she'd read aloud. Sometimes she'd just sit in silence, listening. And slowly, Joseph Jr. joined her. Not with great pronouncements or sudden conversions, just presence. At first, he'd sip coffee and listen, then ask questions, then pray with her. Their daughter, Lizzie, noticed first. One morning, she found them on their knees beside the parlor sofa, hands clasped, whispering a prayer for wisdom and mercy. She didn't interrupt. She just stood there, barefoot and sleepy, absorbing it. It became a rhythm, morning prayers before ink, evening devotions before supper, hymns hummed while folding linens. The press may have shaped the city, but inside this home, the spirit was shaking them. Historians sometimes overlook this period in Joseph Jr.'s life. The Gazette records fewer editorials. There are fewer public speeches, but his journals, those dusty, delicate pages kept in the bottom drawer, tell a different story, a deeper one. In one entry, he writes, "What good is truth in ink if it does not soften our hearts at home?" It wasn't just about publishing anymore. It was about parenting, about marriage, about modeling a faith that was not loud but unwavering. Charlotte led a small group of women in study and prayer. They met in the parlor every Thursday, kneeling on rugs and whispering hope over sick children, distant husbands, uncertain times. They baked bread together afterward, shared quiet laughs, wrote letters to soldiers' wives, and the Charles home became a kind of lighthouse, not bright and blinding, but steady, a place people wandered toward when the world felt overwhelming. You remember one evening when a young man knocked at the door, soaked from the river rain, hat clutched tight in hand. He didn't say much, just muttered something about needing direction. Joseph Jr. didn't ask questions. He brought him inside, gave him dry clothes, and sat with him until the storm passed, both the one outside and the one inside. Charlotte made soup. Lizzie offered her favorite book, and the next day he left with a clean shirt and a copy of the New Testament. It wasn't a miracle, but it mattered. These weren't perfect people. Joseph Jr. still struggled with sharp words, still lost patience with printers who smudged too many columns. Charlotte sometimes worried too much, especially about Lizzie's future. But they knew where to turn, not just to each other, but to the stillness between prayers, to the scriptures that had begun to feel like home. On Sunday evenings, the family gathered for what they called the reading hour. No ink, no headlines, just candlelight, the rustle of pages, and voices reading aloud psalms, essays, poems, letters from distant cousins.
You sat once on the floor beside the hearth, watching Joseph Jr. read from Isaiah while Lizzie dozed against his shoulder, Charlotte stitched quietly nearby, nodding at the familiar lines. And thine ears shall hear a word behind thee, saying, This is the way, walk ye in it. He paused, let the silence linger, then looked at Lizzie and said softly, That's when I hope for you, always. There were still storms, always are. Arguments, illness, fatigue. The Gazette faced financial trouble one winter. Joseph Jr. nearly sold it. But Charlotte prayed, Joseph waited, and slowly things steadied. There's one final thing you notice in this season, a change in Joseph Jr.'s writing. It softens. Still firm, still clear, but now there's grace in the lines. Less about winning arguments, more about understanding them. He writes a column titled Mercy in the Marketplace, about fairness in trade. Another called The Kindness Ledger, where townsfolk can anonymously thank others for unseen acts of kindness. These pieces don't go viral. They don't stir political fire, but they move people. The Gazette becomes a source of comfort, not just commentary. And the family continues. Lizzie grows, begins writing small pieces of her own. Charlotte encourages her, praises every paragraph like it's scripture. Joseph Jr. teaches her how to set type, though she prefers to write in notebooks beside the window, watching clouds. Sometimes you wonder what would have happened if Joseph Jr. had never become religious. Would the paper have been bolder, the editorial sharper? Maybe, but something precious would have been lost. Because now, the Gazette is more than a newspaper. It's a refuge. And in a world that's often too loud, too fast, and too hard, maybe that's the rarest kind of ink.
The wind shifts suddenly, and you feel it before you hear it. A low rumble across the prairie, a deep voice in the clouds. You're riding in a carriage with Joseph Jr., Charlotte, and little Lizzie, her head nestled sleepily in her mother's lap. The road is rough, barely carved from the Illinois wilderness, the wheels crunching over twigs and soft mud. They're returning from a family visit in the countryside, hours from home. The day had started bright, warm even. But now, as dusk falls and trees begin to blur into shadows, the air changes. It carries a promise, no, a warning of rain. Joseph tightens the reins, flicks them lightly, urging the tired horse forward. His face is calm, but focused. Charlotte glances at the sky. The clouds are piling, darker by the second. Lizzie stirs, but doesn't wake. You feel the tension build, not in fear, but in quiet vigilance. This isn't their first time navigating nature's temper, but each trip across these roads comes with risk. Thunder on the prairie is not a polite rumble, it's a marching army. It doesn't knock. It takes the door off its hinges. They're about 5 miles from the next settlement, and Joseph calculates silently. He could stop and seek shelter at the old barn they passed an hour ago, but there's no food there, no firewood, no roof that hasn't leaked since Jackson was president. So he keeps moving. Behind you, a flash of lightning splits the horizon, turning the trees into sharp black silhouettes. A few seconds later, the thunder answers, closer now. You'd think Lizzie would be scared, but there's something about her father's steady hands that eases the worry. She murmurs a question about whether angels make the thunder. Charlotte kisses her forehead and says, maybe. Or maybe God is just reminding us he's near. The carriage creaks, the road narrows. You pass under a canopy of low trees, their branches clawing at the sky. And then the rain begins. Not a sprinkle, but a sheet, a curtain. It pounds the roof of the carriage, drums on the horse's back, and soaks everything not already covered. Joseph shouts over the storm, but only Charlotte hears him.
We'll have to stop. They veer off the road toward a cluster of trees that might offer some cover. Joseph jumps down into ankle-deep mud and leads the horse beneath the thickest branches he can find. Charlotte wraps Lizzie in a blanket and follows. The air is thick with petrichor, the sacred scent of earth after rain. They don't panic. They move like a family who's done this before. You help them rig a temporary shelter using the oilcloth they'd packed under the seat. It's not glamorous, but it'll keep the worst of the water out. The thunder crashes again, loud enough to shake your ribs. Lizzie finally opens her eyes fully, blinking, scared now. Charlotte draws her close, hums a hymn under her breath. Joseph builds a tiny fire using dry twigs from under the carriage, his hands practiced, fast. Within minutes, there's a low, flickering flame, enough to bring some comfort, enough to boil a tin of water for tea. Historians still debate whether these small frontier hardships define the Midwestern families more than their city accomplishments. Was it the press or the prairie that forged the Charles strength? Maybe both. But nights like these left marks, not scars, but seams. Places where the family stitched itself tighter. They wait out the storm with patience, not fear. The fire hisses with every drop of stray rain. The horse snorts nervously. Lizzie finally giggles when a frog leaps past her boots. Joseph smiles, tussles her hair. God's drummer must be tired by now, he says, nodding at the sky. And slowly, the storm passes. Not all at once. The thunder fades like a retreating army. The rain softens into a whisper. The trees sway instead of scream. And somewhere, an owl calls out. Bored, maybe, or just checking in. They don't sleep much, but they do rest. And when dawn breaks, it feels like a reward. You step out from under the trees and look across the prairie. The world is wet and shining. Every blade of grass wears a pearl. The road ahead is slick, but visible. They pack up slowly, carefully, with a quiet precision of people who've seen worse. Back in the carriage, Charlotte braids Lizzie's damp hair. Joseph hums a tune, barely audible. And as they roll forward, you can't help but feel how storms, for all their inconvenience, make memories stronger than sunshine. By mid-morning, they reach a small inn. The keeper recognizes them, ushers them in with hot biscuits and stronger coffee. Joseph pays generously, but the man refuses the full coin. He says, "I read your paper. It helps more than you know." Joseph nods. That's the hope. You sit beside the hearth, drying your boots, watching Lizzie draw pictures in the soot with her finger. One sketch looks like a press, another like a tree. She's young, but even now she knows how things connect. They leave the inn rested, fed, and changed, not dramatically, but with one more thread in their family's quilt. And that thread holds. Through more journeys, through new seasons. Years later, Lizzie will write in her own journal about that storm. She'll describe the key, the owl, the way her father's voice stayed calm even when everything else trembled. She'll call it the night I learned what love feels like in the rain. You smile when you read it because you remember too.
You walk down a bustling street in St. Louis, the wooden boards beneath your boots echoing with every step. The city has changed. You notice it in the accents swirling around you, German, Irish, French. You hear it in the clang of the streetcar bell, the laughter of factory boys on break, and the thrum of politics humming through every barbershop and beer hall. The frontier town you knew has grown into a complicated, lively, unsettled place. And right in the middle of it, Joseph Jr. still prints the Gazette. But his eyes are heavier now, his editorials more measured, his pen no less sharp, but his heart carries a weight you can't ignore.
The country is shifting. There are whispers about Kansas, about new territories, about slavery. The slavery question is no longer a whisper. It's a thunderclap. Missouri, being a border state, carries that uneasy blend of North and South. Enslaved people still work the fields outside town, but abolitionist papers now circulate alongside slave auction notices. Neighbors no longer greet each other with simple hellos. Every conversation feels like it might ignite something. You sit beside Joseph in his study. He's reading 2 letters. One from a fellow printer in Boston urging strong anti-slavery language, and another from a longtime subscriber warning him not to stir division. His jaw tightens. His fingers hover over the tight blocks. He knows the risks. Historians still argue whether Joseph Jr. ever took a full-throated abolitionist stance. His writing always leaned toward moral clarity, but it was also tempered with caution. Perhaps too cautious for some. Perhaps just cautious enough to survive. But one thing is clear. He never stopped calling for compassion, for reform, for conscience. One winter, he publishes a sermon titled "The Bondage of Men and the Freedom of the Soul." He doesn't name names, but he doesn't need to. The implication is plain. Every soul is made equal in the eyes of God. Some praise him for it. Others cancel their subscriptions. He doesn't print a retraction. The Gazette also begins to feature more religious essays, pieces about forgiveness, community, even profiles of local churches. It's a subtle turn, but it reflects the change inside him. Charlotte, too, contributes short devotional reflections under a pseudonym. Her writing is elegant and convicting, like a whisper that knows your secrets. One essay about humility is so quietly profound that it circulates across 3 states. A pastor from Kentucky writes in, asking for permission to reprint it for his congregation. Charlotte agrees, but only if her name is left off. No credit needed, she says, just truth. At the same time, the Gazette navigates scandal. A local politician is caught embezzling. The town buzzes. Most papers hesitate, but Joseph publishes the story, straight and factual. No gossip, no slander. Just names, numbers, and consequences. The official resigns within the week. That's the power of ink when used well. It doesn't scream. It simply reveals. You'd think that kind of work would earn the Gazette more respect. And it does, from some. But it also draws fire. One night, the print shop's windows are shattered. Another, the family receives an anonymous letter accusing Joseph of being a traitor to his class. He shows it to Charlotte. She reads it once, then feeds it to the stove. "We serve one class," she says, "and he doesn't write anonymous letters." Still, the pressure builds. Lizzie, now a teenager, becomes more aware of the tension. She asks her father why he keeps writing things that make people angry. He answers without hesitation, because silence is just agreement with the wrong side. Lizzie nods slowly. That lesson stays with her. You also notice a change in the way Joseph treats his staff. He hires more apprentices, many of them young, rough around the edges, desperate for a trade. He teaches them gently, patiently, always with a story or a joke at hand. Sometimes he lets them sleep in the back room when their homes are too far or too drunk. One apprentice, Thomas, a quiet boy with a stutter, becomes like a second son. Joseph gives him extra lessons, lets him take home scraps of paper to practice on. Eventually, Thomas prints his first solo column, a short piece about the price of apples. It's clumsy, but Joseph reads it like it's Shakespeare. "This boy," he says proudly, will be an editor someday. He's right. Through it all, the Gazette evolves. It becomes less about one voice and more about many. Charlotte's hymns, Lizzie's poetry, Thomas's apple prices. Local women submit recipes. Farmers send in rainfall reports. One man even serializes his own detective story under a ridiculous pseudonym. It's terrible, but readers love it. And in this collage of voices, something beautiful forms. A community on paper. Flawed, diverse, opinionated, and awake. One night, Joseph Jr. sits on the porch listening to the hum of summer insects. Lizzie joins him, barefoot, her hair damp from a bath. "Do you think the country will break?" she asks. He doesn't answer right away. "I don't know," he says softly. "But if it does, we'll still need truth, even more than before." The fireflies blink around them. Somewhere far off, a dog barks. The world doesn't stop moving. But for now, this moment holds.
The house is quieter these days. Not silent, just slower. The creak of floorboards, the clink of a teacup, the soft rustle of pages turning in the study. Joseph Jr. still wakes early, still sharp, still careful with his words. But now, he moves more slowly down the stairs. The newspaper still arrives each day, though he no longer edits it. The ink is still fresh, but his hands are no longer stained with it. You stand in the doorway of his study and watch him write a letter, not for publication, but to an old friend from Lexington. His script is steady, his sentences thoughtful. Every few lines he stops to think, eyes lingering on the window where morning light cuts through the glass. Charlotte brings him a cup of tea. She says nothing, but he smiles. It's the kind of quiet between people who have nothing left to prove to each other. She touches his shoulder as she leaves the room. Lately, his breath comes harder, a cough he can't quite shake. Some days his legs feel like sandbags. But he doesn't complain. He nods when Charlotte fusses, takes his tonics, wraps the shawl around his shoulders when the breeze slips in. He still reads scripture aloud. Lizzie sits with him most evenings, head on his shoulder, listening to the steady rhythm of his voice. Psalms, Proverbs, passages from Paul. Once, she asks him what his favorite verse is. He thinks for a long time, then says, "He hath shewed thee, O man, what is good." That's all. Not flashy, not complicated, just good. You walk with him one afternoon through the backyard garden, helping him keep his balance. He points to the roses Charlotte planted years ago, now grown wild, but beautiful. He chuckles at the way one of the bushes has overtaken the walkway. "Nature does her own editing," he says. It's not dramatic. There's no sudden collapse, no gasp, no final speech, just a gradual softening, like the end of a well-written paragraph. His steps get shorter, his days quieter. The fire that once drove a press and a city settles into embers. One morning, he doesn't come down for breakfast. Charlotte finds him still in bed, breathing slow and shallow. His eyes flicker open when she speaks his name. He smiles, whispers her name back. She holds his hand, calls Lizzie, and the three of them sit there as the clock ticks gently on. He says very little, but he squeezes Lizzie's hand and tells her to keep writing. Even when it's hard, he adds, especially then. He drifts in and out of sleep for the next 2 days. The doctor comes, nods grimly, leaves behind a bitter syrup. Charlotte reads psalms at the bedside. Lizzie writes letters to family, Neighbors bring food and sit quietly in the parlor. One evening, just after sunset, the wind shifts. The air feels different, still, but full of presence. Joseph stirs, opens his eyes one last time, and with a small breath, he is gone. No thunder, no candle blowing out, just peace. Charlotte doesn't cry right away. She smooths the blanket, kisses his forehead, says thank you, not goodbye. The funeral is simple. Wooden coffin, psalms read by friends. The Gazette prints a short obituary on the front page. Joseph Charles Jr., editor, father, friend, a man who loved the truth. Readers from all over send in letters. Farmers, clergy, former apprentices, even a rival editor writes, "Though we often disagreed, I trusted his word more than my own." After the service, Lizzie places a single pressed flower on the casket. It's from the wild rose bush. In the weeks that follow, Charlotte keeps the house running. She writes thank you notes, checks on neighbors, keeps the tea warm. But when the house is finally empty and quiet, she allows herself one long cry in his study. She finds his journal still open. The last entry is just the line, "Let the light in." The Gazette continues, not the same, but not worse. Lizzie begins contributing more, her voice strong, her topics wide. She writes about education, charity, faith, and community. She edits with care, just like her father taught her. And readers notice. They write in saying, "Your father would be proud," and "We feel him still on every page," because they do. His presence lingers in the ink, in the type and the margin notes left behind, in the way Charlotte keeps his chair pulled out, just a little, like he might return at any moment. You stand in the print shop one quiet afternoon years later and touch the old press. It's been polished, maintained, but still creaks in the same spots. You imagine Joseph's hands guiding the rollers, his voice offering quiet instruction. And for a moment, the room feels full, not with sound, but with legacy, with a life well written.
Time moves on, as it always does, quietly and without apology. The city of St. Louis grows taller, louder, and more complicated. New buildings rise where old fields once stretched. Streetcars rattle across paved roads now. Steamships come and go with less fanfare, replaced by trains that thunder in from every direction, carving America into lines of commerce and memory. And yet, the Gazette still prints. You return one brisk autumn morning to find Lizzie at the editor's desk, her sleeves rolled up, smudges of ink on her fingertips, hair pinned back in a rush. She barely looks up as she calls out, "Proof page 4, and watch the line spacing on the obituary column." She's not Joseph, but in some ways she's fiercer, less cautious, more direct. She writes with conviction, and she's inherited the family instinct for when to whisper and when to roar. She signs most of her editorials with just LC, but people know. The Gazette under Lizzie's hand feels modern. There's a new logo, more frequent columns, even a poetry contest that draws entries from school children and steamboat captains alike. She writes about labor conditions in the rail yards, the need for women's education, and even dares to print a serialized romance written by a local school teacher. It's dramatic, sometimes silly, but people love it. Charlotte still visits the print shop most afternoons. She brings apple tarts, checks for typos, and sometimes sits in the corner reading letters aloud from readers who still remember Joseph's voice. One day, a boy walks in with dirt on his boots and a tear in his sleeve. He's about 12, carrying a bundle of old newspaper clippings. "I want to learn to write," he says. "I read this one and thought maybe I could do it too." Lizzie smiles. She sets down her pen, gestures to the stool beside her. "Then let's get started." The spirit of the place hasn't changed. You still smell ink and hear the rhythm of thought turned into action. The Gazette remains a place where words matter, where a good sentence can start a conversation or end an injustice. Historians still argue whether the Gazette ever truly changed the course of Missouri politics, but everyone agrees it changed people, the readers, the writers, the printers, and maybe most of all, the Charles family. You look back at the old press still bolted in the corner, Joseph's press. It doesn't run as often now, replaced by faster, noisier machines. But no one's taken it apart. No one's dared. It's a relic, sure, but it's more than that. It's a monument, a heartbeat. Some evenings, when the shop is closed, Lizzie lights a single oil lamp and reads aloud old articles her father wrote. She doesn't do it for show. There's no audience. Just her voice echoing off wooden walls, her words wrapped in candlelight. It's a kind of prayer. Charlotte eventually passes, peacefully in her sleep, a hymn book still open on her lap. Her funeral is filled with verses, stories, and laughter. People remember her as the quiet force behind so many printed truths, a woman of deep grace and steel spine. Lizzie keeps going. She marries, has children of her own, and teaches them typesetting before they can spell Gazette. And so the rhythm continues. One generation laying ink where the last late thought. Words on paper, ideas on hearts. As the 20th century nears, the Gazette embraces new technology. Photographs, colored ink, wire reports from overseas. But the heart remains local, personal. It still tells the stories of ordinary people with extraordinary courage, still challenges the powerful, still comforts the hurting. One afternoon, a historian visits the office to research early American newspapers. He finds Lizzie in the archives, brushing dust from old ledgers. "Your family helped build the West," he says. She chuckles. "We didn't build it. We just made sure it was honest about who laid the bricks." And she means it. The Gazette celebrates its 100th anniversary with little fanfare. No parades. Just a special edition reprinting the very first page Joseph Charles ever wrote. It ends with his old motto, "Liberty and truth, no matter the cost." You sit with that phrase, feeling its weight. It's more than ink. It's legacy. Eventually, Lizzie retires. She moves to a quiet house with a view of the river, but she still writes letters to the editor, still circles typos with a red pen, still keeps a copy of her father's last journal entry in a drawer beside her bed. And when her time comes, the Gazette prints her obituary on the front page, just like Joseph's. It reads, "Elizabeth Charles, editor, daughter, witness to change, a light in print and in person." The press still runs. Maybe it always will. Because people still need stories, still crave truth told with gentleness and strength, still want to feel connected to those who came before them, to know that someone cared enough to write it all down. And you sit back, close your eyes, and remember. You remember the weight of the ink block in your palm, the smell of hot metal, the sound of a storm on the prairie, the creak of Joseph's chair, Charlotte's tea, Lizzie's first printed poem. You remember it all. And in the quiet that follows, you feel peace. Deep, enduring peace.
And now, dear friend, the presses have fallen silent. The streets outside fade into soft nighttime hums, and the ink has dried gently on 100 pages of memory. You've walked with us through storms and sermons, firelight and typesetting, watching a family shape the West, not with guns or gold, but with words. Let that linger in your chest for a while. You've smelled the warm scent of paper fresh from the press. You stood beside a man who refused to look away from injustice. You've sat at the feet of a woman whose silence carried more power than most speeches. And you've seen what happens when a story doesn't end. It just changes hands. So, as your eyes grow heavy and the edges of thought begin to blur, know this. History isn't some dusty shelf you pass by. It's alive. It's in every truth teller who dares to write, in every quiet voice that prints a challenge, in every night, like this one, when the past reaches out and whispers, "You are part of the story now." Take a breath. Feel your weight settle into the mattress. Let the hum of the fan carry you gently into sleep. The press will be here in the morning. The words will wait. And so we close the cover. Good night, reader. Good night, printer's ink.